Well, we are in the fifth part of this series, Brave, where we're on a journey together of how do we heal the hurt within our relationships? How do we navigate the pain that comes with a shrapnel when someone intentionally or unintentionally hurts us? How do we close the divide? And we've been looking at, very specific actions that create that pain, that create that hurt, that create that divide. We've looked at betrayal, and then we looked at, resentment, then we looked at abandoned, and just maybe by the time we got to the A in abandoned, you were way ahead of me going, Chris, light bulb moment, I know what you're doing, you're spelling the word brave, and if you got there, you quickly went to the V, and you're like, I know what the V is, and you would be right. The V is, vengeance. There's nothing like a good revenge story. There's nothing like a good vengeance moment. Some of the best movie storylines get anchored to that. And what you're going to see in this next part of the story of Joseph, it's a perfect moment. The perfect, storyline for Joseph to get his vengeance, his revenge. Well, where we left off on the story last week, in part 4, Pharaoh had a dream. In fact, he had 2 dreams. One was about 7 really fat cows that were standing there, and then 7 malnourished, gaunt cows kind of emerged, and those 7 malnourished cows ate the fat cows. His second dream was very similar. This time it was wheat. 7 really healthy, tall stalks of wheat grew up. And then right next to him was 7 wind-scorched stalks. And those 7 wind-scorched stalks of wheat consumed the healthy stalks. And Pharaoh asked everyone in his kingdom, all of the priests and magi and magicians and astrologers, hey, what's the meaning of my dreams? And no one could tell him the meaning of his 2 dreams. And then the cupbearer sitting there all of a sudden realized that 2 years before, there was a guy named Joseph in prison where he was, that not only, heard his dreams, he interpreted his dreams, and he got it right. And so the cupbearer tells Pharaoh, hey, Pharaoh, you should go get Joseph. So Pharaoh summons Joseph. Joseph hears Pharaoh and his 2 dreams, and all of a sudden, Joseph interprets them, because this is the meaning. There's going to be 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of famine. But not only does Joseph interpret the dreams, right? That was God's part. Joseph did his part. He gave Pharaoh some incredible leadership wisdom. And after Pharaoh got done listening to this incredible insight of how to handle 7 years of abundance and 7 years of famine, Pharaoh looks at Joseph and says, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. And that's where we paused last week in part 4. 7 years of abundance went by. They worked Joseph's plan, and then all of a sudden the famine hit. And we're told that the entire world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe everywhere. And this is a moment, this is the making of the perfect revenge story. Joseph, the number 2 most powerful person in the world. Pharaoh was the only other person. Joseph, who had all of the influence. Why? Because he was number 2, right next to Pharaoh. Joseph, who had all the power. He could give grain. He could choose not to give grain. Joseph, who had all the control. It's the making of the perfect revenge story. Let me ask you this. If you were Joseph and you were hurt that deeply and you found yourself as the number 2 most powerful person in the world with all the influence, with all the power, with all the control, what would the storyline look like for you? How would you leverage that power? How would you leverage that control? How would you? I know we would want to answer that question one way, but if we really paused, really well, chose to be self-reflective. I mean, I'll just speak for me. I don't know. I don't know what I would do. But here's the thing. We get to see what Joseph chose to do. The story goes on, and we're told that Jacob, dad, learned that there was grain in Egypt, and he said to his sons, why do you just keep looking at each other? Classic dad moment. He continues, and he goes, I've heard that there's grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that, hey boy, so we can live, right? Isn't this just a classic dad, a classic parent moment? He's like, come on. Guys, like, we need food so we don't die, so why don't you do something about it? So the brothers got everything together for a long 10, 11, 12-day journey, and they headed to Egypt. And when they got to Egypt, we're told that Joseph saw his brothers. He recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. He recognized them. Now remember, Joseph was a teenager, 17 years old, when his brothers betrayed him. Now Joseph, this is years and years and years later. Joseph is married, he has kids, he is a grown man. Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. And so Joseph decided to pretend, not to reveal who he really was. And he looked at them and says, well, where do you come from? Where do you come from? What's your motives here? Then, we're told, he remembered. Then he remembered his dreams. I think about this moment. Joseph, again, number 2 most powerful person in the world. All the control, all the influence, all the power. He's standing in front of his brothers, the brothers that betrayed him, the brothers that threw him into a cistern, the brothers that he pleaded with. As Joseph was in the bottom of the cistern, he's pleading with his brothers not to kill him. The same brothers who decided to eat lunch and discuss how they were going to kill him, what they were going to tell dad. He listened to them say, oh, maybe we should just sell him. The same brothers that eventually sold him. And Joseph traveled to Egypt as a slave. But in that moment, Joseph doesn't go back to the cistern. He doesn't go back to the betrayal. He doesn't go back to him pleading for his life. He doesn't go back to that moment. He actually goes back to a moment before that. It was a moment where God gave him these dreams. The moment that God spoke to Joseph. Joseph decided to go back to the God moment, not the betrayal. And I think it's so important because it's so easy for you and me, when we're hurt deeply, to miss the God moment and just go back to the pain. We miss God speaking and we go to the betrayal. We miss God and we go to resentment. We miss God and we go to the abandonment. We miss God and we just want our vengeance. But Joseph doesn't do that. He goes back to this moment that he didn't understand years and years and years before, where God had spoken to him. And then Joseph had a decision to make. What's he going to do with this relationship with these brothers? How is he going to lead himself in a step of healing? Or is he going to choose not to? Well, in that moment, Joseph looks at these men and he calls them out and he goes, hey, you're spies. And they were terrified. I mean, again, this stranger to them, I mean, it's Joseph, but they don't know this. This number 2 most powerful guy in all the world is looking at them, calling them out, calling them spies. Well, the brothers started to try to convince them that they weren't spies. They started to give them family details of who they were and their purpose. And they're like, no, we're just here for food. Our father Jacob sent us with some silver to buy food. We're starving. We just need food. We heard that Egypt had food. And Joseph kept on coming back. He's like, no, you're spies. What's your motives? Why are you really here? What are you scouting out? What are you doing here? And they're like, no, really, we're spies. And all of a sudden they're like, hey, what you got to know, there were 12 of us. 12 of us sons. They're trying to give him some real details to convince him that they weren't spies. And then they said, the youngest is now with our father, and one is no more. It's interesting how they said that to a complete stranger. That the youngest was with dad, but there was another one. It's no more. Joseph, looking at them, decides to test them. He wants to see how honest are they really. I mean, they revealed a little corner of transparency, honesty, by saying one is no more. But he really wanted to see, have they changed at all? Should he trust them at all? Should he reveal to them who he really is? So he decides to decides to test them. So he looks at them and says, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to throw all of you into prison except for one. And the one of you can go back home and bring this youngest boy to me. Well, they all get thrown in jail. And 3 days later, Joseph, brings them back out and says, I've changed my mind. I'm going to send all of you home except for one. I'm just going to keep one of you in jail. But the rest of you I'm going to send home and, for you to bring back this youngest boy, this youngest son. As they stood there, the brothers started to talk in their native tongue, assuming that Joseph couldn't understand them. And they started to say, surely we're being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life. Imagine this. Joseph is standing there. He can understand them. They don't realize he can understand them, and they don't realize it's Joseph. And all of a sudden they're like, yeah, Joseph pleaded for his life with us, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come upon us. And then Reuben speaks up, the oldest son. He goes, didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood. And the storyteller makes sure that we know that they did not realize that Joseph could understand them, since he was using an interpreter. And in that moment, we're told that Joseph just turns around and starts to weep. He probably took a couple steps away from his brothers and with his back to them, and he probably started wiping away just the tears that started to well within his eyes. He was doing everything to keep composure. It's one thing to think about your betrayer. It's another thing to be face to face with your betrayer. It's a whole nother level to hear them talk about what they did to you in front of you. And Joseph weeps. Well, he gathers himself and he turns back around and he approaches the brothers and says, you, and he points to Simeon, you are going to stay here. You're going to be in jail, and I'm going to send the rest of the brothers home. They take Simeon away, and Joseph orders his staff to fill their bags with grain. But then he also tells them to put the silver that they had used to pay for the grain, he tells them to put the silver in the bags as well. And he sends them off. They started to travel, and that night they got off their donkeys and they're going to rest. And one of the brothers wanted to feed his donkey, so he opened up his sack of grain. And when he opened it up, just the terror in his eyes. His heart had to just go racing because all of a sudden he saw the silver cups. The cups that they had used to pay for the grain were in his bag. And all of a sudden all the brothers just scream out. They're like, hey, what is this that God has done to us? Guilt had just wreaked havoc for years and years and years. And this is why when we don't heal the hurt relationally, guilt just tears us apart from the inside out. The pain, the realization of what they had done to Joseph, what they had done to their family, what they had done to their dad, the guilt, the lies, the betrayal. Well, the next morning they packed up their donkeys and they started their trip all the way home. Again, this would have been a 10, 11, 12-day journey. And you just would have to imagine, right? A bunch of brothers walking all day long, that they had one question that consumed them, one question that took up all of their mental, emotional space, one question that, well, they probably talked through over and over again is, well, what are we going to tell Dad? It's the same question that they asked when Joseph was in the well. It was the same question that they asked as they watched Joseph get carted away to Egypt as a slave. What are we going to tell Dad? I mean, the first time, right, they made up an elaborate story convincing Dad that Joseph was eaten by an animal. But this time, something shifted within them. This time, they decided to tell Dad the truth. And they got home and they told him everything that just had happened. And that Simeon, that this governor, this number 2 most powerful person in the world, had kept Simeon. Why? Because he didn't trust that they weren't spies and that they were supposed to bring Benjamin back, the youngest. Well, we're told that the famine continued. And again, it was a severe famine, and they ate all of their food. And one day, Jacob, Dad, looks at the brothers and is like, hey, you got to go back to Egypt to get food. And the brothers reminded Dad that, well, we can't go back to Egypt without Benjamin, the youngest. We can't go back. In fact, Simeon's still there. But we can't return without the youngest. Because this guy, this governor, thinks we're spies. And we're trying to convince him that we are honest, trustworthy, that we're just there for the grain. Benjamin. So Jacob looks at his sons and he goes, well, take the best items as gifts for this governor. So he gave them pistachios and almonds, spices, myrrh, as much as they could carry. And Jacob says to his sons, hey, take a double portion of the silver. You know, one portion to give back that was in your sacks, and the second portion to buy more grain. And oh, by the way, you can take Benjamin, but please bring him back. Remember. Joseph was Jacob's favorite. Why? Well, out of Jacob's 4 wives, Rachel, his second wife, was the love of his life. And Joseph was actually the oldest boy between Jacob and Rachel. And Benjamin was the youngest out of the 2. And Benjamin was the youngest out of all the sons. And Rachel, mom, died giving birth to Benjamin. So Jacob just begged his boys to make sure that they brought Benjamin back. Well, they traveled back to Egypt to get food. And they went to Joseph, the governor, the second most powerful person in the world. And we're told that when Joseph saw Benjamin, when he saw him, could you imagine? You see, Benjamin wasn't only Joseph's biological full brother. He wasn't even part of the betrayal. Benjamin was at home the day the rest of the brothers decided to betray Joseph and sell him into slavery. He had nothing to do with it. And could you imagine that moment when Joseph saw Benjamin? When he saw him. When he saw him. Well, then the brothers said, we were brought here because of the silver that was put back into our sacks the first time. And then they started talking amongst themselves, and they said, if he wants to attack us and overpower us and seize us as slaves and take our donkeys, I guess he can. You see, the brothers were consumed with a perspective that this guy, this governor, was out to get them. That this governor was going to leverage his power and his influence. That this governor was going to do whatever he wanted to do. Why? Because this is kind of how the brothers had lived their lives, doing whatever they wanted to do. You see, there's something within all of us. And I'm not saying this is a good thing. I'm just saying there's something within all of us when someone wrongs you. When someone wrongs you, you want to make it right. Even the score. To get back. To make things even again. And they just assumed that this governor was going to do the same thing. Well, the brothers walked up to the steward as they were making their way to Joseph's house, because Joseph had invited them all to eat at his house. And they tried to convince the steward that they were innocent. They tried to convince the steward that they weren't spies. They tried to convince the steward that they had done everything that this governor guy had asked them to do. They were all on trying to plead for their innocence. And then all of a sudden, Joseph shows up. In the midst of their little speech to the steward, Joseph shows up, and Joseph looks at them and says, "How is your aged father you told me about? Is he still living?" And then he goes, is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about? And then Joseph walks out of the room and begins to weep. This time he had to literally leave the room because the emotion was that intense. He finally gets himself under control. He comes back in. They sit down. They eat a whole meal together. And then all of a sudden Joseph, it kind of repeats the same storyline. He gives them all the grain. They give him the silver. Joseph instructs them to fill the bags with grain and then put the silver back in the bags just like the time before. But this time he instructs for them to take his special cup and put it in one of the bags. The brothers start to make their way home, but before they can leave the city gates, the steward comes and stops them and says, "You've stolen the cup." The brothers try to convince him that they didn't. The steward wanted nothing to do with him. He's like, no, you stole the cup, Joseph's cup. And then all of a sudden the brothers were like, "If any of your servants is found to have it, he will die, and the rest of us will become my Lord's slaves." And then all of a sudden the steward, from the oldest brother to the youngest, started to check every bag. The cup wasn't there. And then he got to Benjamin, and he finds the cup in his bag. Well, Judah was beside himself. He tries to convince the steward. He tries to convince Joseph when they went back to Joseph's house. They didn't know how this happened, But Judah was like, hey, take me, take me, take me. You can't have Benjamin, take me. Like, don't do that, don't do that. And then all of a sudden he goes, how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, no, no. Do not let me see the misery that would come on my father. And then Joseph, in this moment, you could feel the emotion, dismisses everyone from the room. And then he weeps so loud that everyone around the house could hear him. So much so that people went to Pharaoh's household to let them know, hey, something's going on at Joseph's house. And in the midst of all of that emotion, years in the making, Joseph looks at his brothers and he says, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? And he says, hey, come closer to me. Come closer to me. And when they had done so, he said, I'm your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt, into slavery. And now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here. And then listen to what he says. Because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. That God was working. That God was doing something despite your intentions to harm me. We'll pause the story there, and I think about this moment, not once, not twice, but 3 times where Joseph weeps. I've thought about this moment a lot because the author makes sure we know that he weeps one time, turns around, comes back. The second time he removes himself from the room to weep, and he comes back. And the third time he dismisses everyone, and he weeps so loud that everyone in the city could hear about it. That the growing emotion happening within Joseph as he's looking at his betrayers, the hurt, the pain, the shrapnel, the divide. But yet, Joseph weeps. He weeps. His heart breaks for the severed relationship. His heart breaks for a relationship that was whole and then it was broken. He weeps for lost years. He weeps for a family that was completely obliterated. He weeps. You see, we either will get our revenge or our heart will break for a severed relationship. We either will hold on to our revenge story or our hearts will break. We can't have both. Maybe you've heard this said before, that hurting people hurt people, and it's such a true statement. That hurting people, and that's why it's so important for us to go on a journey of healing, to heal the hurt. Because if we don't, we will continue to hurt other people, and sometimes we know we're doing it, and sometimes we don't. But what gets attached to hurting people, hurt people, is, well, the truth that getting back will always get you back. That getting back at someone, it always gets you back. Why? Because sin and vengeance is a sin and revenge is a sin. Sin always has a gotcha. Every time we try to get our revenge, when we send that text, send that email, give that look, power up, make a power play, go behind someone's back, gossip, try to divide a family, divide a relationship. Every time we try to get back, to get our revenge, right? Guess what? It always gets us back. In fact, getting even never is even, ever. And that's why there's this cycle of hurt that never stops. Last week, we looked at 3 very specific actions that God sees and God guides and God heals. And attached to God heals, I read Psalm 147 where it says that God heals the brokenhearted. This last week in our staff meeting, we just made our way through that little part of the psalm. And I just asked the question. I said to the staff team, I said, hey, if you would like to share, would you just share your healing journey and maybe just some specifics? It was amazing to listen to the vulnerability of our staff here at Tri-County Church, their willingness to go there. So many great insights were shared. One of them, one person said, you got to put down your sword. You got to put down your sword. And this is what she was saying. Getting back will always get you back. Getting even is never even. You got to put down your sword, and guess what? You got to help heal people. You don't have to just be a hurting person that hurts people. You can choose a different pathway. You can choose to step through your hurt into someone else's hurt. Now, you can't heal anyone. Don't mishear that. This is so important. You can't heal anyone, but you can step through your hurt into someone else's hurt and go on a healing journey with them, and in return, God's going to do a healing work within you. But you have to put down your sword. And guess what? You can't carry a sword and weep, be broken about the broken relationship. Which one are you going to carry? Which one are you going to carry? I want to close reading these words. These words were written thousands of years after this Joseph story. But as I read these words from the Apostle Paul, I just want you to think through this story, this part of the story we just heard. As I read through these words, I just want you to think through everything Joseph did. And I want you to think through your pain and your hurt as well. Paul writes, do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is all possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge, and I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed them. If your enemy is thirsty, give them something to drink. Put down your sword. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. If it's all possible, according to you, live at peace with everyone. Weep for broken relationships. Pray for healing of broken relationships. Step through your hurt into someone else's hurt and experience healing for you as God uses you to help them heal. Build bridges, close the divine, extend forgiveness, seek peace. Let's pray. Lord, I just ask that we'll seek peace. That instead of vengeance, which is yours, that we'll weep for broken, severed relationships. That we'll seek ways to bring healing to those relationships. In your name I pray. Amen.